Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years. Pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Today's episode is a solo one, and it's a conversation I've been circling for a long time. It's for those of you who are not new to yoga, who are not deciding whether or not to do a training. You're not asking if this work matters to you. You're already in it. And yet, something feels off. You might love the work. You might still believe in yoga deeply, but your career doesn't feel coherent or stable or intelligible in the way that you thought it would by now. You might be thinking things like, I thought I'd feel more settled by this stage, or I thought it would get easier to explain what I do, or I thought there would be more support, more clarity, more something. This episode is for that because I see so many capable and amazing and ethical and thoughtful yoga professionals quietly blaming themselves for a problem that's frankly not personal. So today I want to name something clearly and slowly without hype or fixes. Yoga has no career ladder. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by that, because I don't mean that yoga can't be a career. It's my career, has been for over 20 years. And I don't mean that people aren't doing meaningful work and skilled work. What I mean is that yoga does not have a shared structural pathway for professional progression. And pretending that it does has caused very real harm. This is not a work harder episode or a pivot faster episode. And it's not maybe you didn't want it badly enough episode. It's a clarity episode. And clarity, in my experience, is what actually reduces our burnout. This episode is also the conceptual foundation for this thing that I opened earlier this year called The Back Room. It's a professional inner space for yoga workers who want to think clearly about their careers without hustle. There's no high-ticket coaching, and there's no industry drama. At the end, I'll tell you how to access a reflection sheet that goes with this conversation if you want to sit with it more slowly. Okay, so for now, let's start at the beginning. Most of us entered yoga with an assumption that we didn't consciously choose. We absorbed it. Like, the assumption was that, like other professions, there was this path. You know, you start somewhere and you gain experience and you deepen your skills, and over time, the work becomes more stable and respected and better compensated. That assumption isn't naive, it's cultural. And in yoga, the implied path often sounds something like this. You start teaching group classes, then you teach workshops, and then you assist or start teacher trainings, and then maybe you specialize, and then maybe you become a yoga therapist, and then maybe, finally, you work in more formal settings where your work is taken more seriously. There's an idea that you somehow, move up. And when you look closely at actual careers, not Instagram bios, not conference lineups, that progression almost never unfolds cleanly. What I see instead is people doing everything all at once. They're teaching group classes and running workshops and seeing private clients and holding advanced certifications and trying to explain their work to institutions that don't quite understand what it is that they do. And yet, despite all that experience and skill and amazing work, pay doesn't reliably increase, and work doesn't become more stable, and professional gravitas remains oddly elusive. This is often the point where people start to quietly ask, am I doing this wrong? Or did I miss a step? Or why does this all feel so precarious? And because there's no shared language for the structural problem, that confusion turns inward. What I want to name is this very clearly. The absence of a career ladder is not a reflection of your effort, intelligence, or dedication. It's a condition of the field itself. When a field doesn't have a clear career framework like us, something else steps in to fill the gap. In yoga, that thing is training. Training is, of course, valuable. Skill development matters, education matters, but in the absence of real structure, training takes on a second role. It becomes a symbol of progress. It becomes a promise that sounds like this will make your work easier to get. This will make people take you more seriously. This will open doors. This promise is especially strong in yoga therapy, which is often framed explicitly or implicitly as the top rung of the ladder. And yet, here's what credentials do not reliably do. They do not create jobs. They do not guarantee humane working conditions, and they do not ensure that institutions understand or value your work. For many people, the moment they complete a certification is the moment support disappears. There's no advocacy, there's no guidance about employment realities, there's no concern for workload or pay or sustainability. If work doesn't materialize, the narrative quietly shifts to you might need more training, or you might need to niche further, or you might need to prove yourself longer. This isn't accidental. Training as product is one of the primary economic engines of the yoga industry. When careers don't stabilize, people are then encouraged to invest again, rather than question the system. And this creates a very specific kind of harm. People begin to equate paying for education with moving forward, even when their lived reality doesn't change. There's something important to say here, gently but clearly. Most yoga professionals pursue training in good faith. They're not chasing credentials for status alone. They're seeking coherence. They're trying to understand how to do their work well and responsibly. But in the absence of a career framework, training begins to carry weight it was never meant to carry. It becomes not just education, but orientation. People start using training to answer questions that training cannot actually resolve, like, am I legitimate? Am I on the right path? Am I moving forward or standing still? When those questions don't have structural answers, education becomes the place people go to feel held. Over time, this creates a subtle but powerful distortion. Training becomes framed as the thing that will finally make the career make sense. Not because the content promises that explicitly, but because nothing else is offering a path. This is how midway points quietly become treated as destinations. Instead of thinking, what does this training prepare me to do in the real world, people are encouraged implicitly to ask, what should I train in next? And the moment someone finishes one certification, the horizon shifts again. Like the goalposts move, the clarity doesn't arrive, and the answer is always the same thing, more training. This dynamic is especially harmful because it places the burden of career development entirely on the individual. If the work doesn't materialize, the assumption is not that the system failed. It's that the person needs to invest more, refine more, prove more. And this quietly erodes trust. People start to doubt their own experience. They start to question whether they're qualified enough. Even after years of practice and teaching, they begin to feel like perpetually behind. And this is not a reflection of their capacity. It's a reflection of a system that offers education without advocacy. There's also an unspoken contradiction here that many people feel but don't name. Training is often marketed as a pathway to sustainability, but the economic model of training depends on instability. If careers reliably stabilized after a certain point, demand for constant retraining would drop. So the system quietly requires people to stay unsure. Hope becomes a renewable resource, and while hope can be beautiful, when it's repeatedly leveraged without structural support, it also becomes exhausting. I want to be very clear about something here. Questioning this dynamic is not anti-education, and it's not dismissive of rigor. And it is not a critique of the people who teach trainings in good faith. It is a critique of a system that treats education as the end of the road instead of a bridge to meaningful, supported work. When training is decoupled from real-world advocacy, fair working conditions, and collective support, it cannot carry the weight we place on it. And asking it to do so is part of what breaks people down. This is why so many mid-career yoga professionals feel both highly trained and deeply uncertain at the same time. They have knowledge and they have skill, but they don't have a structure that translates those things into stability. That disconnect is not accidental, and it's not your fault. When people start to sense that training alone isn't delivering what is promised, they look elsewhere. They niche harder, they teach more, they brand themselves more visibly. And of all the false ladders available, personal branding is the most socially rewarded. Having a name gets confused with having a livelihood. Visibility gets mistaken for stability. You can be highly visible and deeply professionally precarious, my friends. Another common response after this personal branding is the advice to just teach more classes, add more offerings, say yes to more requests. This keeps people busy, and it creates the appearance of momentum, and it allows deeper structural problems to remain untouched. It ignores very real limits, that bodies age, that care responsibilities increase, that time is finite. I think often of those revered teachers who taught yoga classes until they were 95 years old. And oftentimes those teachers got very public praise for their work. People said things like, "Isn't she amazing?" And sure, that is amazing. But have we also considered that those people just couldn't afford to retire? Those strategies aren't foolish, right? They're survival responses to a system with no map. But staying busy is not the same thing as building a career. Over time, this dynamic takes its toll. People become demoralized. Work becomes competitive in ways that feel misaligned. Colleagues quietly become rivals, and many people leave yoga, not loudly, not angrily, but quietly. Burnout is often framed as a personal capacity issue, but in my experience, burnout is often grief. Grief for a career that never quite formed, a future that was implied but never delivered, and a sense of professional adulthood that never arrived. This grief very often goes unnamed, and when grief goes unnamed, it turns into self-blame. People assume, "I didn't work hard enough," or "everyone else figured something out that I didn't." This self-blame is not only inaccurate, it's corrosive. In prolonged instability, it's very natural to look for a rescue. Many yoga professionals, often without realizing it, are waiting for their knight in shining armor, an organization or a credential or a governing body or someone to finally say, "This is real work." This hope is understandable. We're culturally trained to believe in rescue. And after repeated disappointment, looking outside yourself for answers is a very common trauma response. But waiting for rescue delays our own personal agency. It keeps people oriented towards permission instead of trying to find clarity. And clarity, not rescue, is what actually changes lives in this field. There's another layer to this rescue fantasy that I think is worth talking about. Many yoga professionals aren't just waiting for a rescue, they're waiting for retroactive validation. They're waiting for something outside themselves to confirm that the years they've spent training and teaching and caring and refining weren't a mistake. That the work that they've done counts. And that it was all leading somewhere recognizable. So when an organization promises legitimacy, or a credential implies authority, or a respected figure says, "This is the future of the field," it lands with enormous weight. Not because people are naive, but because they're tired. Tired of having to explain their work, tired of having to justify their income, tired of holding complexity alone. And And when you're tired, it makes sense to hope that someone else has the map. Another form of outsourced clarity shows up in how people seek advice. I see yoga professionals repeatedly turning to free social media groups or mentors who built careers in a version of the industry that no longer exists, or teachers who succeeded 10 or 15 years ago under completely different conditions. And again, this isn't stupidity, it's grief and disorientation. When there's no shared infrastructure, people look sideways instead of inward. They try to borrow answers that were shaped by a different market and a different cultural moment and a different economy. But advice that worked in a yoga industry with fewer teachers or lower saturation and more institutional openness, maybe, does not translate cleanly to now. Trying to apply those answers often creates more confusion for us, not less. There's also a quieter form of rescue fantasy that doesn't get talked about enough. It's the belief that if you just stay long enough, if you just keep showing up, if you just keep proving your devotion, the system will eventually notice you and reward you. This belief is especially strong in care-based work of all kinds, where endurance is often mistaken for virtue. But systems do not reward loyalty. They reward alignment with incentives. And in yoga, many of the incentives are not designed around sustainability for workers. They're designed around growth, visibility, and consumption. So when people organize their lives around being discovered or chosen, they often delay the hard work of asking, what do I actually want my work to look like? What conditions do I need to stay well? What am I no longer willing to tolerate? This is where clarity becomes uncomfortable. I know it does. But also, my friends, it's very liberating. Clarity doesn't come from the right organization or the right credential or the right endorsement. Clarity comes from the reckoning with your actual circumstances, with your body and your finances and your time and your responsibility and your desires. And that reckoning can feel scary. I know it can, because it means letting go of the fantasy that someone else is going to hand you a solution. And it's also where your own agency returns. Not the kind of agency that looks like hustle or self-optimization, but the kind that comes from saying, I see the system clearly now, and I'm going to make decisions based on reality, not based on hope. So if yoga has no career ladder, what does exist? Well, what I see is a landscape of bespoke careers, built mostly alone. Skilled, thoughtful professionals doing meaningful work, amazing work, without colleagues, without shared language, without agreed upon measures of progress. In this context, moving up as a concept stops making sense. Progress for us starts to look like the impact we make, the influence we have. Do we have enough money to take a vacation? It looks like understanding the work that you are actually called to do and understanding how to get paid for that work without contorting yourself to fit a fantasy pathway. You're not responsible for the absence of a ladder. Let me repeat that. You are not responsible for the absence of a career ladder. You are responsible for deciding what work you want to do and advocating for your opportunity to do that work. And that's not hustle, that's just clarity and orientation. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I have not figured it out, I want to say this clearly. You have not failed. You're navigating terrain that was just never mapped. So this podcast episode, is the foundation for the back room, that professional space for yoga workers who want to reflect and have strategy and shared intelligence. It's not a venting or free consulting or performative hustle kind of space. And what I've done here is created a reflection sheet that pairs with this episode if it resonated with you. And that reflection sheet is designed to help you sit with where you're actually at right now, without urgency, without self-blame. And you can find that in the back room. It is free, and I'll link it in the show notes. Careers in yoga, my friends, they're never meant to be linear. They were never meant to be the same. And the work now is not to try and climb higher. It's to see clearly where you are and to choose your next step with intention. Thank you for listening. I'm always so grateful that you're here, truly. Maybe I'll see you in the back room. And if not, I will catch you around the water cooler next time.